Welcome to the Trinity Columbus podcast, your weekly source for inspiration, truth, and encouragement. Get ready to dive into this week's message. We hope it will challenge your heart and change your life. Now here's Pastor Josh.
Do you have your Bible today? You ready to jump in the Word with me? All right, let's do it. Let's grab our Bibles and together let's go to Exodus chapter number 33. Exodus chapter number 33. Exodus chapter number 33. We're in the middle of our series called Into the Wilderness, and we're looking at those first few months and years where Israel journeyed through the wilderness to find the will of God, to find the promised land, right? And you know, there's 40 years later that happened, and I'm not going to have the time in this series to dive into a lot of the events that happened in the 40 years after they missed the will of God. I really want to deal with that first trek through the wilderness as we walk through this series. And you know, we've been talking about wilderness seasons or hard times in our life. Anybody ever been through a wilderness season in your life? A dry time, maybe spiritually, maybe financially, and a difficult time, a time of testing. We find that wilderness journeys are often times of testing in people's lives and in the scripture. And so we're using this series to find the will of God, the purpose of God, the lessons that God teaches us while we're in the wilderness. And in today's message, we come to a crossroads for Moses and the children of Israel. It's a place where Moses needs some assurance and some direction as he wanders through this wilderness season with Israel. And today we're going to talk about knowing and following the will of God. And somebody told me last week that the message was so appropriate for graduates. Today's going to be no different. It's going to be really appropriate for people who are in seasons where they're making decisions and trying to find God's will for their life. And matter of fact, when we talk about doing the will of God, sometimes we overcomplicate it. Sometimes we overcomplicate the will of God. I was reminded as I was getting ready to preach this message this morning, all through the weekend, God kept telling me, my sheep know my voice and a stranger they won't follow. A lot of people ask me, how do you know the voice of God, or how do you hear the voice of God? Let me tell you, everybody hears the voice of God, but Christians recognize it. If you have a great deal of difficulty recognizing the voice of God, it might be that you're not right with Him. Is it okay for me to say that? Is that if you have a great deal of difficulty recognizing the voice of God, it might be that you're not in a right relationship with Him. You haven't learned that voice yet. His Spirit within you doesn't bear witness with His Spirit yet. Because His children, His sheep, know. He didn't say they hear my voice. He said they recognize my voice. They know my voice. And today, as we look to this passage with Moses, we're going to see that reality of how important it is to know the will of God and follow the will of God. You ready? And so let's talk about it for just a few moments out of Exodus chapter 33. And let me just start with this point. In defining moments, we need to know the will of God. In defining moments in our life, we need to know the will of God. I think, and I'm just going to kind of take a slow pace today, if that's okay, and really dig deep and talk to us. I think we get in too much trouble because in the defining moments of our life, we move forward without knowing the will of God. I think a lot of the hardship, heartache, difficulty, things that we go through in life that are unpleasant and uncomfortable are because we made a move without knowing the will of God. Matter of fact, I was talking to my brother-in-law, Terry, this weekend as I got to spend some time with him, and we were talking about a story in the Bible, and he was talking about some ventures and some business things, and he watches us online all the time. He's probably watching this morning, and he was talking about some business ventures and things that he has going on in his life, and he talked about, you know, wanting to run full speed and go wide open, and I was talking about some things in my life, and he's like, you got to step out, not be afraid, don't be in fear, and I told him, I said, you know, one of the biggest things that I've learned is in the story of Abraham, that one of the most detrimental things we can do is not know the will of God and try to move ahead of God and help God and create problems for ourselves. And if you know the story of Abraham, Ishmael, and Isaac, you know that Abraham tried to aid God, got ahead of God because he didn't understand the will of God. And so in defining moments, we need to know the will of God. And I'm just going to, I'll get to this in a moment, but when you don't know the will of God, the best thing you can do, I'm going to go ahead and give you one of the best pieces of advice you'll ever get right here. I believe that highly in it. When you don't know the will of God, the best thing you can do is just stand still and wait. Don't make decisions. Don't get hasty. Don't step out. Don't buy a new car. Right? Just wait on the will of God until you know it. And we're going to see through today's story how important it is in those defining moments to know the will of God. So let's go to Exodus chapter number 33, verses 12 and 13. And this is Moses talking. He's having a prayer meeting with God. He's trying to lead Israel through the wilderness, and he's come to a crossroads, and he really needs some answers. And so he and God get alone, and they have a conversation. Isn't that another little piece of wisdom right there? When you don't know the will of God, ask. Like, get along with God. Don't just move on assumption. Know the will of God. And so Moses says to the Lord, see, you've said to me that I'm to bring this people up, but you've not let me know whom you're sending with me. You have said that I know you by name and that I have found grace in your sight. If that's the case, then, therefore, I pray, if I have found that grace in your sight, then show me your way. You could just scratch way right there and write will if you wanted to, and you wouldn't do any harm to the text. Show me your way. Show me your path. Show me your direction. Show me your will. That I may know you and that I might prove that I've really found grace in your sight. And consider that this nation is your people. Prove to me they're your people by showing me your will. Okay? So what Moses is saying is, you've told me a lot of things, but you've left a lot of unanswered questions for me. And how many of you know that's kind of how God does sometimes? Sometimes he reveals the will of God phase by phase, piece by piece, glory to glory, segment by segment. He doesn't always show you the full picture from the front, from the get-go. Now, make no mistake, let's preach for just a minute. God knows the end from the beginning. But he doesn't always reveal the end to us from the beginning. Why is that? Why doesn't God just show us the complete picture every step along the way with every detail laid out so that we could know exactly what he's doing in our life? Because then we'd think we had it figured out. We wouldn't rely on him. We wouldn't walk by faith. We wouldn't trust him. We'd deviate and do our own thing instead of his thing. And so he leaves some questions unanswered. Moses is wrestling with the will of God. He says, you've told me to lead them out of Egypt. You've told me to take them to the promised land, but I've still got so many questions in my life. Matter of fact, number one, who's going with us? You've given me your promise. You tell me I found grace in your sight, yet I have questions I don't understand. Show me your way. Show me your will. Show me your path for me. Let me know your will. Give me direction. Give me guidance. Prove that you're with us, that you are for us. And so God replies to him. You ready? You want to hear God's reply? It's really simple. It's really straightforward. It's right there. I think in the next verse, in verse 14, yes, he says, my presence will go with you and I'll give you rest. Man, that's a powerful word right there. I want you to hear me. So many people are so distraught over decisions they need to make in their life. So distraught over direction that they need, guidance they need. They need to know the will of God. Well, how do I know the will of God? Well, I've told you you'll know his voice and a stranger you won't follow. But right here, he tells Moses, I'm going to tell you how you'll know that I'm with you, how you'll know my will, how you'll know my direction. Number one, you will sense my presence, and my presence will give you peace. Somebody didn't hear me. You said, Pastor, it says rest. Let me tell you something. You can't rest if you ain't at peace. Oh, let me preach for just a minute. I said, God said, I'll send you two things to let you know my will and know that I'm with you and know that I'm guiding you and know that I'm directing you. The first is my presence. The second is my peace. You will know the will of God by the peace that accompanies it. I want to preach this for somebody this morning. His presence, His peace, and His will go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. The presence of God and the peace of God go together. I'll send my presence and you will rest. You will rest in your mind. You will rest in your body. You will rest. You won't worry. You won't have anxiety. You will be at ease because of the assurance that I am with you. My mind quickly went to the book of Acts, where Paul is on the ship headed for the island, or headed for Rome, where he ends up shipwrecked in Melita. And if you remember the story, he tells the people, they're all frantically scammering her out. They're throwing the tackling of the ship overboard. They're hoping for the best case scenario. And Paul says, the angel of the Lord, whose is mine and whose I am, has stood by me this night and left me with the assurance that everything's going to be all right as long as we stay in the boat. Not one soul is going to perish or be in jeopardy. And so Paul is what? He's at peace. In the midst of the presence of a storm, in the midst of the middle of the chaos, when everybody else is clamoring about trying to find and figure and make and create and throw tackling over. What are they doing by throwing the tackling of the ship overboard? They're lightening the ship, their last-ditch effort in a chaotic moment, trying to, in their own strength and ability, save themselves. And Paul's just sitting there with his hands behind his head, leaned back on one of the masts, going, boys, quit worrying. It's all under control. How can you have that kind of peace in the middle of a problem? Well, it's because His presence, the angel of the Lord, whose I am and who is mine, has stood by me this night. He's been with me. His presence and His peace follow His will. And when you walk in His will, you walk in His presence and you walk in His peace. Many people, the reason they don't have peace is because they're not in the will of God. They've walked out from under the covering. They've left behind His presence and His peace, and they face the difficulties of life with that absence and that void in their life. And honey, it'll drive you crazy. It'll drive you crazy. Let me tell you something about the will of God. It's always confirmed by His peace. You can write that down. The will of God will always accompany His peace. It's peace that passes all understanding. What does that mean? It means that it goes beyond reason. It defies logic. When you ought to be troubled, when everything around you is falling apart, when everything looks like it's going to just collapse and implode, you walk with a certainty and a stillness of mind that cannot be explained because of the peace of God that passes or defies logic. You're at rest in your soul. You're not clamoring about, you're not frantic, you're not filled with anxiety, discouragement, depression. It may be shrouded in uncertainty. There may be mystery. You may not know what's coming next, but you're at peace. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know who holds my tomorrow. I don't know what's around the bend, but I know He's been faithful. And if I'm walking in His will, then I'll have peace. Like Abraham, you might be asked to step out into a world you don't even know, to leave behind everything that is common or safe for you. But I assure you, His presence and His peace go with you when you walk in His will. So God says, Moses, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you my presence and my peace. And so Moses replies, you ready? I love just Moses having a conversation back and forth with God. Who are you going to send with us? Where are we going? We still don't have all the details. God's like, I'll give you my presence and my peace, but that's it. So Moses replies back. He says in verse 15, then he said to him, watch this, this is powerful. If your presence does not go with us, don't take us there. For how then will it be known that your people and I have found grace in your sight if you don't go with us? So we shall be separate, your people and I, from all the people who are upon the face of the earth. So this is what makes us special, is the fact that your presence abides with us. That's what sets us apart. That's what makes us different. I want you to see that this morning because there's so much said right here. Moses makes a powerful statement. Here's what he pretty much says. He says, I'd rather walk through a wilderness in the will of God than to inherit a promised land outside of God's presence. Can I restate that for you? He said, I'd rather walk through a wilderness knowing I'm in the will of God. No, you didn't catch it. He looks at God and he says, don't send me to the promised land if you don't go with me. I don't want to go up if you don't go up. I'd rather walk through a wilderness. I'd rather be in a desert place. I'd rather be desolate, discouraged, and with a deficit than I had step into the promises and the goodness of God without His presence. I'd rather walk through a hard time and know I'm in the will of God than have the best of life and be apart from my Savior. He said, if your presence don't go, don't send me. Man, what would it be like if we lived our life like that? The only place I want to be is where the presence of God is. It's like Moses is saying, if God ain't in it, I don't want a part in it. If you're not going, I'm not going. Don't you dare send me with this bunch of rebellious, stiff-necked people if you ain't going with us. Right? He'd had enough of them. He's like, the only way I'm going to make it is if you're with me. What are you saying, Pastor? I'm saying Moses understood the importance of the will of God. And so when he didn't know the will of God, he sought the will of God. He got alone with God and said, God, give me your presence, give me your peace, walk with me, show me your way. I don't have to have all the answers, but I got to have you. Oh, isn't that good? I don't have to know every step, but I need to know that you're with me. I need to know that we're in this thing together. Can I tell you the will of God's all that matters? I know this may seem a little, is the word I'm looking for, masochistic, self-mutilating, but my happiness isn't all that matters. My pleasure isn't all that matters. My comfort isn't all that matters. All that matters is the will of God. All that matters is what is God's will for our lives. And Moses wanted that assurance. He wanted to know that wherever he went, God was with him. He wanted to know that he and God were on the same page. He wanted to know that he was in the will of God. Sometimes in life, we simply need to know God's will. And I have been at a number of different crossroads throughout my life where I needed to know what was next. I needed to know what decision to make. I needed to know how to move forward. And I can tell you in every one of those moments, I have learned the best thing for me to do is to stop, get still, and hear from God before I do anything else. I can tell you there was a moment when God called us to come to Columbus to be the pastor here at Trinity, okay? And let me just clarify, we're in a good place right now, but there was a season where we weren't sure. We weren't sure we made the right decisions, right? Can I be real for a minute? I mean, I got here 6 months later, some people wanted to leave. And I was like, God, did I make the right choice? I can tell you what I lean on. Julie will tell you she was there. One day I come in, Bible in hand, a notepad, and a bottle of water. And I told her, I said, I'm going out in those woods behind the house. I don't even know who they belong to. I'll be trespassing. But I'm going out there in the middle of those woods with this bottle of water and this Bible, and I'm not coming back till I've heard from God as to what I'm supposed to do. About 4 hours later, here I come. Right? I've heard from God. I know what to do. I know what decision to make. When you've had that kind of moment with God, you've heard from God, you know God's voice. Then when the hardship comes, you don't run. When the difficulty comes, you stick with it. You stay with it. I'm going to say something here this morning. I want you to hear me, and I want you to hear my heart. Julie and I, we've been married almost 22 years now. I've known as much of my life with her as without her, right? 22 years. It isn't always easy. Y'all may not believe this, but I'm hard to live with sometimes. Okay? I'm stuck in my ways. I'm difficult. I get emotional sometimes. I can be hard to live with. She's perfect. She's Miss Never Do No Wrong. I did. I think the Lord will forgive me for being kind. It isn't always easy, okay? It isn't always easy. Sometimes there's moments. Anybody ever have those moments? Even in your marriage, in your family, in your life? I have to go back. There was a moment a while back where I just was at a low place and we were not getting along as good as we always have. And I have to go back to a moment. I have to go back to a moment in March at a youth camp and an altar where I said, God, if you'll give me someone like that, I'll be all right. And he said, she'll be your wife. When that thought of there might be something greener on the other side comes across, what do? I go back to that moment. Is somebody hearing me? When we're fighting and she wants to strangle me, I have to go back to that moment where I know I heard the voice and will of God. When I'll get off my marriage so you don't think we're on the brink of divorce or something. But when things at the church get hard, I have to go back to those woods in Livonia, Georgia. To that moment when I heard his voice. I want you to hear this pastor this morning. A lot of the difficulty that you're facing in your life is because you have not heard and settled the will of God. You walk in defeat, you walk in disagreement, you walk in all of this disorientation because you're not sure about that one thing. You haven't settled the will of God. Am I preaching to somebody this morning? When you've heard, Moses said, God, I've got to know for myself what your plan for this people is if I'm expected to move forward. For Israel, discerning God's direction and guidance was a lot simpler. I think if God would do this for me, I would never doubt his will. He gave them a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night to know exactly where to go, when to go, and how to go. And I'm like, Lord, could I just have one of those kind of signs in the sky sometimes? From the moment they crossed the Red Sea, you may not know this in this story, but from the moment they crossed the Red Sea, a supernatural phenomenon took place, and it would remain a present and powerful reminder of God's presence and the direction of his will. I'm talking about the pillar of cloud and fire that guided them throughout their wilderness wanderings. As a matter of fact, go with me to Exodus chapter 13. We're going to back up just a little bit. Exodus chapter 13. We're not going to stay here long, but I want to give you just a quick reference. Exodus 13, verses 21 and 22. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way. Everybody say, lead the way. To show them where to go. And it was by night a pillar of fire to give them light so as to go by day and night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar of fire by night from before the people. In other words, it was always present. They had a discernible, definable landmark by which to measure the will of God. Oh, don't you wish it was that easy? If God had just write it in the clouds for me. Exodus ends with a powerful concluding statement. The book is wrapped up with instructions for erecting the tabernacle. And up until this point, you begin to pick up on this truth. But now it becomes abundantly clear. Israel had been led by that cloud by day and pillar of fire by night. And God would literally go before them, leading them and guiding them every step of the way. He would tell them when to move, when to settle, when to stay, when to go. Look at it in Exodus chapter 40, verses 34 through 38. I know we're jumping around a little bit this morning. Then the cloud that covered the tabernacle of meeting and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle, and Moses was not able to enter that tabernacle of meeting because of the cloud that rested above it, and the glory of God filled the tabernacle. Watch this. Whenever the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle, the children of Israel would go onward in all their journeys. Is there another reference right there? I believe there is. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not journey till the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was above the tabernacle by day, the fire was over it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys. What that says to me is that when God moved, they moved. And when God stayed, they stayed. When He went left, they went left. When He went right, they went right. Everything they did was directed and dictated by doing one thing and one thing only: following God's presence. They chased the Shekinah glory all over that wilderness. When he moved, they moved. When He settled, they settled. They sat still and silent. They weren't chasing feelings. They weren't running from offenses or hurts. They weren't responding in rebellion. They let the Spirit of God lead them. Can I preach for just a minute? Too many of our decisions are based on who hurt our feelings. Too many of our decisions are based on what feels good in a moment. I want to get to the place that the only thing that dictates my movement, the only thing that makes me make decisions, the only thing that gravitates with such weight and gravity and heaviness upon my soul and my spirit is the presence of God. I don't care what my neighbor thinks. I don't care who hurt my feelings. I don't care what I'm going through in the moment. If God's not moving, I'm not moving. And if He does move, honey, see you later. Right? I want to follow the will of God. But be honest with me for a minute. How many of our decisions are made because somebody hurt our feelings? Because somebody spoke to us in a way we didn't like. Come on, somebody. And then we wonder why we're so off course in life. We left the will of God a long time ago. We left the will of God a long time ago. There's nothing more important than doing the will of God. Most of us fight an uphill battle every single day of our life because we're living contrary to His will. And as Proverbs 13:15 says, the way of the transgressor is hard. Nothing's more important than the will of God. Moses knew that. Israel chased it. Jesus submitted to it. Hear me. In the Garden of Gethsemane, when all hell sailed against Him and death was His only option, Jesus prayed, nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. When's the last time, let me ask you a question. When's the last time your will and God's will came into conflict and you chose not what you want, but what God wanted? Most of us pray until we convince ourselves that God's will is our will and our will is God's will. If your will and God's will has never come into conflict, then you're not following God. Let me say it another way. I know this may be too brash of a blanket statement, but if your will and God's will has never come into conflict, you are your God. Because if you follow God long enough, He's going to demand something of you that you don't agree with or you don't like. At some point, those two mentalities, mindsets, paths are coming into competition, and you have to make a choice. And I'm telling you, hear this passage this morning, there is a good, perfect, and acceptable will of God. And it's the most important thing. Now, let me real quick talk about learning to discern the will of God in your life, and then I'll let you go. Okay? How do we learn to discern the will of God? What are some lessons we can learn about the will of God? Well, let's go somewhere different this morning. Let's go to Numbers chapter number 9. Numbers chapter number 9. And let's look together. I love this passage. Now, on the day that the tabernacle was raised up, the cloud covered the tabernacle and the tent of the testimony from evening until morning. It was above the tabernacle like the appearance of fire. Everybody look at that word right there. There's a word in there, covered. Let me start with verse 16 right there. His will is a covering. Remember, they equated his presence with his will. Right? His presence and his will, they're equal. Like where his presence went, that's where we're intended to go. Okay? His will is a covering, a cloud. It followed. I want you to hear that. Following his will provided an ironclad accountability. It withstands the scrutiny of cynics and critics that will judge your motives. I don't care what you think about what I do. I love you. I appreciate your wisdom, your guidance, but I don't listen to critics. Why? Because as long as I'm in the will of God, it doesn't matter what people think. The will of God is a covering. It was a cloud that sat over them, that covered them. The will of God is an umbrella of protection. Let me preach it for just a minute. That when all hell comes against you and everything falls apart, you know God's got it in his hands. Why? Because you're in his will. Any difficulty that I face is his problem, not mine. Why? Because I'm under the covering. Because I'm in his will. Watch for it. Verses 17 through 19 teach us. You ready? I'll start with 16. Let's stay there. Did I not finish reading it? So it was always a cloud covered it by day and appearance of fire by night. There we go. We're finished. Now we can go to 17. Whenever the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle, after that the children of Israel would journey, and in the place where the cloud settled, they would pitch their tents. And at the command of the Lord, the children of Israel would journey, and at the command of the Lord, they would camp as long, everybody say long. As long as the cloud stayed above the tabernacle, they remained camped. Oh, I could preach that all night long. Let's read verse 19 though. Even when the cloud continued long, many days above the tabernacle, the children of Israel kept the charge of the Lord and did not journey. Somebody say it with me. Don't you dare move till God moves. Don't you dare move till God moves. It said even when he stayed in a place a long time, they learned not to move until God moved. One of the hardest things, one of the things we mess up the most is we get impatient with God. We will not wait. We refuse to wait on God's timetable and then wonder why we get ahead of God, why we're in a mess, why things fall apart, why it doesn't work out. If this sermon doesn't teach you but this one thing, hear it right here. Do not move without God. There's a time to stay, a time to go, and a time to wait. I think Jake read the notes this week when he planned that worship set. He is in the waiting. I knew what I was preaching. I knew what I'm facing in my own life. I'm sitting over there singing. He's in the waiting. I'm crying like a baby. There's a time to stay, a time to go, and a time to stand pat. And just mark time. Sometimes he says yes. Sometimes he says no. Sometimes he says not now. Holding on when God clearly says no is not faith, it's disobedience. Moving forward when God clearly says stay is not ambition, it's disobedience. Let's look at verses 20 through 22. 20's there. So it was when the cloud was above the tabernacle a few days, according to the command of the Lord, they would remain encamped, and according to the command of the Lord, they would journey. Verses 21, 22. So it was when the cloud remained only from evening until morning. When the cloud was taken up in the morning, then they would journey, whether by day or by night. Whenever the cloud was taken up, they would journey. Whether it was 2 days, a month, or a year that the cloud remained over the tabernacle, the children of Israel would remain encamped and not journey. But when it was taken up, they would journey. How many of you understand from this illustration, from this story that Moses is recording for us? He is trying to teach us about following the presence of God. He's trying to teach us about knowing the will of God, walking with God. And the next thing that I learned right there in 20 through 22 is that you can move on God's timetable or your own timetable, but never both. Come on, hear me, friend. One of the most dangerous things you can do is get ahead of God. Just ask Abraham about Ishmael. Some of you will give birth to an Ishmael because you're too impatient to wait on the Lord. And then you'll wonder why you fight in conflict and frustration for the rest of your life. Let's look at the last little part of it. Verse 23. At the command of the Lord they remained encamped, and at the command of the Lord they journeyed and kept the charge of the Lord at the command of the Lord by the hand of Moses. There is nothing more important than the command of God. There's nothing more important than God's will. There's nothing more important than God's will. Well, Pastor, how do I discern God's will? Well, you do have to be able to discern it. Some are asking, how can I know the will of God? Well, Israel had a cloud and a pillar to follow. But what about us? How can we know the will of God? How can we know the will of God for our life? Well, let's start with a simple verse in Psalm 40 and 8. Here it is. I delight to do your will, O my God, and your law is within my heart. All right. Number one, God's will is clearly and definitively communicated in His Word. That's above all else. I got my electronic Bible up here. Anybody got a paper Bible? All right. I'll even keep your place for you, Courtney. This is the litmus test of the will of God. This is the litmus test for the will of God for your life. I remember being in my pastor's office, and I don't know how I was in there at that moment, but in stormed a lady, and she was at odds with the pastor because she wanted to marry an unbeliever. And the pastor took her in the word, and he showed her where Corinthians says, do not be unequally yoked together with an unbeliever. What fellowship has light with darkness? What concord has Christ with Belial? I mean, he took her down the line right from the word. And she said, I don't care what the Bible says. I love him. Okay, let's start right here. This is the litmus test. This is the litmus test. Everybody knows what a litmus test is? This is the standard by which we measure the will of God. If what you're feeling in your heart, and that's a whole nother sermon, but if what you're feeling God is leading you to do, if what you're discerning does not line up with the pages of this book, I can go ahead and tell you, Satan can make it look right when it ain't right. It better line up with this book, or it's probably not the will of God. Right? The second thing that'll help you discern the will of God, I want to make sure I do them in order, is to get alone with God and let Him speak to you. James reminds us that if we need wisdom, in James 1:5, he says, let him ask the Father who gives freely and will not mock a man. That's not how it's written, but that's what it means. It says, and he upbraideth not. It means he doesn't poke fun or play with people's emotions. If you need wisdom, get alone with God and refuse to come out until you've heard. God will reveal His will. God doesn't want you out here wandering aimlessly. God doesn't want you lost. He'll chase down the one that's lost. His last desire is for you to be without direction. So if you'll get alone with Him and ask Him and listen for Him to speak, He'll speak to you. He wants you to have clarity. What I find, and I'm not trying to preach a whole other sermon here this morning, I'm trying to conclude, but here's what I find. We're too busy with too many distractions and other voices and calamities and clamorings going on in our life to be still enough, long enough to hear the still small voice. And so when the word isn't breaking through, it's probably because we're not having an ear to hear. When the will is not clear, what's the scripture says? It says, record the vision, make it plain, that he that hears it might run. God wants you to have a clear and defined plan for your life. He says, I have a plan for you. Jeremiah 29:11. Cut yourself off from social media. Cut yourself off for your phone for an hour and get in a prayer closet until you hear from God. And lastly, I'm going to go back to our text. God declared to Moses, I'll go with you and that my presence will give you peace or rest. Peace is a precious thing. And when it's absent, it's a pretty good indicator that you're not in the will of God. And when it's present, it's a pretty good indicator that you are. Now, let me say one more thing with those three things, and then we conclude it. Case and come. Okay? I hope I'm saying this correctly. Please hear me and give me a little leniency and grace. You can have one and not the other two, and it's probably a pretty good indicator that it may not be the will of God for you. Think about it with me. It can be in that word, but it may not be applicable to my situation today, right now. There's stuff in that word about being in poverty, and I may be rich. There's stuff about being rich, and I may be in poverty. Okay? So there's the written word. There's also peace, his presence, and there's also his voice and prayer, right? Here's the problem. You can think you heard God in prayer and it not line up with that word. You can have peace and it be a false peace. Is anybody following me this morning? But I haven't, forgive me, but I'm just going to say it the way I've seen it in my life. I hope it lines up. I hope it makes sense. I have never walked through a place where it lined up with the will of God. I heard from God in prayer and I had peace in my heart that I didn't know 100% it was the will of God. If all three of those come into alignment, don't run on one of them, because false peace will lead you astray. A misheard word will lead you astray. The Bible is full of truth that might not be absolutely applicable in that exact moment. Is that fair? But when the word and what you've confirmed through prayer and through peace in your spirit line up together, you got a pretty good chances of hitting the will of God dead on the mark. Okay? And again, that will is all that matters. It's all that matters. Father, I love you. And I thank you for these truths that you recorded in Scripture for our guidance and direction. For Israel and their wandering through the wilderness, their tabernacle journey, their cloud of day and pillar of fire by night, and the Shekinah glory of God that teach us that the most important thing is the will of God. The will of God. The will of God. The will of God. And the psalmist wrote, I delight to do your will, oh my God. You know our hearts, Father. You know our hearts.
Thank you for listening. We hope you were inspired by this week's message. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast to stay connected and receive the latest messages from Trinity Columbus. For church information, upcoming events, or to partner financially, visit our website at trinitycolumbus.com. If you'd like to join us live or in person, Sunday service begins at 11 a.m. Stay connected, stay encouraged. Until next time.